What if the one choice that could save your children from the street was also the one that could put them in the ground? For a widow with only 90 days to prevent foreclosure, finding a stranger bleeding out in her field is more than a dilemma. It's a death sentence or a divine miracle. She doesn't know which, but she's about to find out that his secrets are as dangerous as his wounds. Welcome back to Life Wild West, your home for the most gripping tales from America's untamed frontier. We are so thrilled to have you settled in with us today. Before we step into Eleanor's harsh reality, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button. You're not just watching a video, you're joining a family of storytellers and history lovers, helping us keep the spirit of the Old West alive for generations to come. Your support truly makes it all possible. The unforgiving wind of the 1875 Montana Territory was a constant thief. It stole the warmth from your bones, the hope from your heart, and for Eleanor Vance, it was slowly stealing the life from her crumbling homestead. This small plot of land, once a testament to love and hard work, had become a prison of memory and debt. The day had begun with a visitor, a harbinger of doom in a starched collar and polished city boots. Mr. Abernathy, the banker, had made the long ride from town, not out of concern, but for the cold, hard business of foreclosure. He sat at the rough-hewn table Samuel had built, his leather satchel looking alien and obscene against the worn wood. He'd sipped the water she offered, his eyes darting around the cabin, cataloging every crack in the walls, every patch on her children's clothes, every sign of their desperate poverty. His sympathy was a thin, brittle veneer over a core of pure business. "Eleanor," he'd begun, using her first name with a familiarity she found repulsive. "The bank has been extraordinarily patient." He opened his satchel and laid out the papers, a death warrant for her home. "Samuel was a good man, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills. The board has reached its final decision. You have 3 months, 90 days, to settle the outstanding mortgage." 3 months? Eleanor's voice was a whisper. It was a blizzard season. The land was frozen. There was no work, no way to earn that kind of money. "Mr. Abernathy, please." "My hands are tied," he said, the classic excuse of a man who refused to lift a finger. He stood up, adjusting his coat, eager to escape the bleak atmosphere of her failure. "I trust you'll make the necessary arrangements. The bank will take possession at the start of the new season." He left without another word, his horse's hoofbeats a final, rhythmic nail in her coffin. Now, hours later, the banker's cold words still echoed in the silent cabin. 90 days. The phrase was a brand on her soul. She knelt before the heavy cedar chest Samuel had crafted for their wedding, the scent of wood and memories clinging to it. She lifted the lid and pulled out the family Bible, its leather cover as soft and wrinkled as an old man's hand. Her fingers, chapped and raw from lye soap and splintered wood, traced the names and dates inside. A life documented in faded ink. Clara, her daughter. Liam, her son. Her marriage to Samuel, a day so full of sunshine and promise it felt like a dream. Then, the last entry, stark and brutal. Samuel Vance departed this life, October 1874. 4 months. It felt like a century. It felt like yesterday. Pneumonia had taken him, swift and silent in the night, leaving a gaping hole in their world that nothing could fill. He was the foundation of this place, the heart and soul of it. His laughter had been the cabin's music, his strength its walls. Now the silence was deafening, broken only by the mournful whistle of the wind through the very gaps he would have sealed. Through the single grimy window, she watched her children. Clara, at 10, was already a little woman, her face etched with a seriousness that didn't belong on a child. She moved with a purpose, mending socks, her small hands already calloused. 8-year-old Liam tried so hard to be the man of the house, chopping kindling with a hatchet nearly as big as he was, his small brow furrowed in concentration. He had his father's spirit, a fact that brought Eleanor a wave of both fierce pride and crushing sorrow. She let the memories wash over her, a painful but necessary ritual. She remembered Samuel, his hands strong and capable as he laid the foundation logs for this very cabin. "Every log, Eleanor," he'd said, his smile bright with sweat and love, "is a promise. A promise of a future, of a family raised on this land." He had promised to teach Liam how to read the seasons, how to coax life from the stubborn soil. He had promised Clara he would build her a pony cart for her 12th birthday, promises now scattered like dust on the wind. The homestead itself seemed to be grieving, falling apart in sympathy. The small herd of cattle was down to 2 bony milk cows. The barn roof sagged dangerously, and the wheat field, Samuel's pride, was a barren, frozen patch of failure. She had sold what she could. Samuel's tools went first, each hammer and saw, a piece of his soul she bartered for a bag of flour. Then his horse, and finally, her own mother's silver locket. The money vanished like snow in spring. If you've ever felt the weight of the world on your shoulders like Eleanor, that crushing feeling of being alone against the storm, share your story of resilience in the comments below. Your strength might be the beacon someone else needs to see to find their own way through the dark. A trip to Henderson's general store yesterday had been the final humiliation. She had counted out her last few pennies for a small bag of cornmeal, her cheeks burning with shame as she asked Mr. Henderson if he could possibly extend her a little more credit. He was a kind man, his face weathered with a weary sympathy for the struggles he saw every day. "Eleanor, I wish I could," he'd said, his voice low and kind, which somehow made it worse. "But Mr. Abernathy has been explicit. No more credit for the Vance homestead." Just then, the banker's wife, a woman draped in wool and self-satisfaction, had entered the store. Her eyes swept over Eleanor's patched dress and worn boots with a look of pity so profound it felt like an insult. It was in that moment, under the cold gaze of the town's prosperity, that Eleanor had never felt more alone, more destitute. The town saw her as a charity case, a tragic story to be whispered about over tea. They didn't see the fight still raging inside her. Tonight, the fight felt like a flickering ember. The stew for dinner was thin, mostly water and a few potatoes, but she'd added a sprig of thyme from her summer garden to make it fragrant. She gave Clara and Liam the 2 small pieces of salted pork, pretending she wasn't hungry herself. "Mama," Clara said, her voice quiet as she ate. "Mrs. Gable at church said I could help her card wool. She'll pay me." Eleanor's heart constricted. Her daughter, her brilliant, book-loving Clara, having to sell her childhood hours for pennies. But pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "That's a fine opportunity, darling. But your schoolwork comes first. Your father, he wanted you both to have an education." "I'll do it after," Clara promised. "I can trap rabbits," Liam announced, puffing out his small chest. Pa, he showed me how to make a snare." The slip of the tongue calling his father by his first name as he'd heard his mother do in her grief was a small knife in Eleanor's heart. "I know he did, my brave boy," she said, managing a smile. "And you will be a great trapper. But for now, you focus on your chores here." After the children were asleep, tucked under threadbare quilts, the true weight of the night settled upon her. She sat at the table, the banker's words and the memory of Mrs. Abernathy's pity swirling in her mind. She bowed her head, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Samuel," she whispered to the shadows, "I don't know how. I don't have the strength. Please show me a sign. Show me what to do." The answer came not as a whisper, but as a roar. The storm hit without warning, a furious beast of wind and snow that seemed to erupt from the prairie itself. The sky, which had been a clear, cold slate of stars, was swallowed by a churning blackness. The wind shrieked like a banshee, rattling the cabin's lone window and shaking the very foundations. Eleanor rushed to secure the door, stuffing rags into the cracks to keep the biting drafts at bay. The cattle bellowed in fear from the barn. It was a terrifying, primal storm, the kind that made you feel small and insignificant. And it was in the midst of this chaos that she heard it, a cry nearly stolen by the wind. "Mama, over here! Mama!" It was Liam. His voice was thin and sharp with a terror she'd never heard before. Adrenaline surged through her, cold and sharp. She grabbed Samuel's heavy oilskin coat from its peg, threw it over her shoulders and plunged into the blinding tempest. The snow was a horizontal wall of white, stinging her face like 1,000 tiny needles. "Liam! Clara!" she screamed, her voice swallowed by the gale. She followed the sound of his cries, stumbling through the drifts toward the edge of their frozen wheat field. She found them huddled together, two small, dark shapes against the swirling white. Clara stood rigid, pointing a trembling finger at a dark mound in the snow. "Dear God in heaven," Eleanor breathed. It was a horse, a magnificent black stallion, its lifeblood a stark, dark stain against the pure white snow. And tangled in its reins, half buried in a drift, was a man. He was dressed in fine, dark clothes, now soaked and frozen, but it was the spreading stain on his coat that held her gaze. Blood. So much blood. "He's alive," Clara choked out, her words barely audible over the wind. "We saw him move." Eleanor's mind raced. This was trouble. Deep, dangerous trouble. A man shot and left for dead in a storm. Whoever did this could still be out there. Bringing him inside would be bringing that danger into her home, into her children's lives. They had nothing. No food to spare, no medicine beyond her garden herbs. Every rational thought screamed at her to turn back, to protect her own. But then she looked at the man, a helpless soul at the mercy of the storm, and she thought of her prayer just an hour before. "Show me a sign." Was this it? A test? What kind of woman would she be if she left another human being to die in the snow, no matter the risk? Samuel would never have hesitated. This is a defining moment for Eleanor, a choice between safety and humanity. What would you have done? Risk your family for a complete stranger? Let us know your honest thoughts in the comments section below. "Liam, run to the house. Get the fire roaring as hot as it will go," she yelled over the wind. "Clara, you're with me. We have to get him inside." The man was a dead weight, heavy with muscle and unconsciousness. It was a brutal, agonizing struggle to drag him through the deepening snow. The wind fought them every step of the way, trying to reclaim its victim. By the time they hauled him across the threshold of the cabin, they were all gasping for breath, their muscles screaming in protest. They laid him on the floor near the hearth, the warmth of the fire beginning to thaw his frozen clothes. The children watched, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, as Eleanor took Samuel's sharpest knife and began to cut away the man's coat and shirt. The wound in his side was ugly, a dark, ragged hole. But as she cleaned it, her hands moving with a long-forgotten competence from her youth helping her doctor father, she saw the bullet had passed through. It was his best chance. As she worked, her fingers brushed against the landscape of his skin. It was a roadmap of a violent life. Thin, silvery scars from knives, puckered circles from old bullet wounds. Her fear returned. Who was this man? Then, as she moved his vest, something fell to the floor with a soft clink, a beautiful silver pocket watch. She picked it up. It was heavy, intricately engraved. She opened the cover. An inscription read, "For my Silas. My heart is yours, always, Isabella, Silas." He had a name, and someone named Isabella had loved him, had given him her heart. He wasn't just a threat anymore. He was a man, loved and lost, just like her Samuel. A wave of empathy washed over her, extinguishing the last of her hesitation. She would save him. The night was a long, desperate vigil. The storm howled its fury outside, but inside, the three of them fought for a stranger's life. Clara was a godsend, her small hands steady as she ground herbs for a poultice and replaced the cool cloths on his burning forehead. Liam kept the woodbox filled, his fear channeled into a stoic sense of duty. Silas's fever climbed and he began to talk, his words tumbling out in a delirious, fragmented story. "Isabella, the valley. It was for you," he'd moan, his head thrashing on the folded blanket she'd placed beneath it. "Cain, Jedediah Cain, will not have it. The papers must protect the valley." His words painted a picture of love, betrayal, and a desperate fight for something precious. "Hush now," Eleanor would soothe, her voice a low murmur. "You are safe here. Rest." As dawn approached, the storm finally exhausted itself, and with it, the man's fever broke. The pale morning light crept into the cabin, illuminating a scene of quiet devastation and weary hope. Eleanor sent the children, pale and exhausted, to their beds. She sat in Samuel's old rocking chair, watching the stranger's chest rise and fall in a steady, peaceful rhythm. As the first direct ray of sunlight pierced the window, his eyes opened. They were a deep, startling gray, the color of a stormy sky just before it clears. They were lucid, intelligent, and full of a quiet power. He looked at her, his gaze taking in her weary face, the humble cabin, and the blood-stained rags. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You." His voice was a raw whisper. "You saved me." Eleanor could only nod, suddenly conscious of the mud on her dress and the exhaustion that felt bone-deep. "You should rest." She started to rise, but his hand shot out, catching her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Thank you," he said, and the two words were imbued with a depth of gratitude that resonated through her entire being. He held her gaze for a beat longer, a silent promise passing between them before his eyes slipped closed again, this time in a true, healing sleep. Eleanor stood frozen for a long moment, his touch still warm on her skin. A strange sense of fate settled over her. She had asked for a sign, and the storm had delivered a wounded man full of secrets and danger to her door. She had no idea if he was her salvation or her ruin, but she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that nothing would ever be the same. If you admire Eleanor's incredible strength and compassion in the face of fear, show your support by hitting that like button. It's a small click for you, but it tells us that these stories of courage and character are what you want to see more of. For 3 days, a tense quiet filled the small cabin. Eleanor went about her chores, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety buzzing beneath the surface. She sent Clara and Liam to school, hoping the routine would be a comfort, but she knew their thoughts were at home with the wounded stranger. Silas, as she now thought of him, was a model patient during his brief moments of lucidity. He was polite, his speech refined, and his gratitude seemed boundless. He would apologize for the trouble he was causing, his storm-gray eyes filled with sincere regret. He would try to refuse the meager broth she offered, looking at the children with an expression that told her he understood exactly what his presence was costing them. But it was during his fevered dreams that the mystery of his life deepened. He spoke of Jedediah Cain with a venom that was terrifying. He murmured about water rights and deeds and a place called the Crimson Valley. And he spoke the name Isabella with a grief so profound it made Eleanor's own loss feel fresh and raw. On the 4th morning, everything shifted. She was changing his bandage when he spoke, his voice clear and stronger than it had been. "Mrs. Vance." She looked up, surprised. His eyes were clear, the fever gone. "You've shown me a kindness I haven't known in a long time," he said, his gaze sweeping over the humble cabin. "You and your children, you've sacrificed for a stranger." "It was the right thing to do," she said simply. "Perhaps," he conceded. "But the right thing is rarely the easy thing. I see how you struggle. I am not a blind man." A spark of her fierce pride ignited. "We manage. We are not looking for a handout, Mr." She let the sentence hang, realizing she didn't know his last name. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. Monroe, Silas Monroe, and I would never insult you by offering a handout, but I am a man who pays his debts." His tone was calm, but it held an undercurrent of authority that was unmistakable. He was a man accustomed to being in charge, a man who understood the power of wealth and influence. It was in the way he held himself, even wounded and lying on her floor. Before their conversation could continue, the cabin door flew open. It was Clara, her face as white as the snow outside, her eyes wide with terror. "Mama," she cried, her voice trembling. "Riders." "The same kind of men, the ones from the stories. They're coming down the road." The change in Silas Monroe was instantaneous and absolute. The recovering patient vanished, replaced by a predator. Every line of his body went taut. Despite the fresh wound in his side, he pushed himself up on one elbow, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "The root cellar," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Get the children in there, now. Do not make a sound." He looked at Eleanor, his gaze intense. "You have seen no one. You have heard nothing. Your life may depend on it." The urgency in his voice was terrifying. There was no time to argue. The thud of approaching hoofbeats was already audible. Eleanor herded a frightened Clara and Liam toward the trapdoor to the dark earthen cellar, placing a finger on her lips. "Be brave," she whispered, before closing the heavy door over them. She turned back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Silas had managed to pull himself into the small, shadowed pantry, out of sight. She smoothed her apron with trembling hands, took a deep breath that did nothing to calm her, and opened the door. 3 men sat on horseback, their figures dark and menacing against the winter landscape. They were hard men, their faces etched with cruelty and greed. The leader, a hulking man with a thick, greasy beard and a jagged scar that cut through his eyebrow, leaned forward on his saddle. "Well now," he sneered, his eyes roving over Eleanor, then her dilapidated cabin. "What have we here? A lonely little widow." He tipped his hat in a gesture of pure mockery. "We're tracking a man, ma'am. A fancy fella named Monroe rode a big black stallion. You wouldn't have seen him pass this way, would you?" Eleanor felt a cold dread wash over her, but she met his gaze, her chin held high. "I've seen no one," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The storm was bad. "No one has been on this road." The leader's eyes narrowed into suspicious slits. He didn't believe her. "Is that so?" he drawled, swinging a leg over his saddle and dropping to the ground. He swaggered toward her, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. "You see, my boss, Mr. Kane, he's very interested in finding Mr. Monroe, and he pays well for information." He paused, his eyes flicking over her patched dress again. "You look like a woman who could use the money." "I am not," Eleanor said, the steel returning to her voice. "A woman who takes money from men like you. This is my property. I'll thank you to leave." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Feisty, ain't she?" he said to his companions. He took another step closer, invading her space, his foul breath washing over her. "We're gonna have a look around. Your choice if you make it easy, or if you make it hard." He reached out to push her aside. But Eleanor stood her ground, an immovable rock of maternal fury. She did not flinch. She did not back down. She simply stared into his cold, dead eyes, a silent declaration of war. The story of Eleanor Vance and the mysterious Silas Monroe is just beginning. The danger is no longer a secret. It's on her doorstep. We'll be releasing part 2 next week, and the stakes are about to get higher than you can possibly imagine. Make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on so you don't miss the next chapter of this incredible saga right here on Life Wild West. We'll see you then.